But do you think the new generation growing up now actually thinks differently to sort of pre-internet generations?
I do think they think differently, and the real question, I think, is how much of that is normal human plasticity, right? We all are really good at responding to opportunities, and this young generation has different opportunities than my generation had. And how much of it is actually that their brains are being wired differently because of exposure to the media environment they're being exposed to. You know, people my age, mid-40s and up, are wringing their hands right over what kids are doing, teens are doing on Facebook. As if we would not have done those things had Facebook existed when we were young. And so we want to project this idea, well, you know, I wasn't putting drunk pictures of myself up on Facebook. It's like, well, yeah, no one gave us the chance. But I remember us. I think we would have done that in a heartbeat if Facebook had been around.
We have a sense of visibility that we've never seen before. So we're used to being able to see a certain group of kids in certain places, right? The mall, we can see kids hanging out with their friends that way. But as adults, we don't typically have a really good sense of all the kids and a good sense of where they are and what they're doing when they're with their friends. What's going on online is, in many ways, it's youth space. So they're there, they're goofing around as though they're there just with their friends. And so what ends up happening is you can get a sense of what's going on really in broad sweeps. And it isn't just the kids like the kids in your community, but the kids who are in different communities all around the world with all sorts of different ideas of what is normative behavior, right? And that what is normal, what is common really differs. And so we see these behaviors online and we're like, oh my gosh, it's radically different today than it ever was before. It's not really. We're seeing patterns, and a lot of it has to do with their particular social positions, right? So the popular kids are using the technologies to try to maintain and reinforce popularity in very particular ways. And that's where we see social status becoming really critical. So it's no longer the Nikes that are the particular status markers, it's the way of actually maintaining certain kinds of friendships and getting certain kinds of, responses from certain celebrities. All of that play goes on. We also see marginalized kids who were desperately seeking some sort of support, and were often at loss, out in more traditional senses of schools or whatnot, finding a community online. And this is one of the more powerful narratives of the internet, right? Your queer kids who can actually find people like them, who can support them. They're much more willing to be public in a traditional sense because they're desperate for somebody who might be like them. For the popular kid, it's much more about being public to the school, people who will give them credit, that will give them status. And so we see these different groups contending with it differently. We also see the power of certain public figures, in negotiating with teenagers. So if you think about which teenagers are using Twitter in the earliest of stages, a lot of it comes down to who's talking to celebrities. And this wasn't that different from when I was growing up, and the idea of writing to the new kids on the block, right, the boy band of the day, in the hopes that you would get a letter, in response, right, which was inevitably a form letter, was the possibility of reaching out and getting a response, feeling as though that person really existed and they really recognized your existence. Twitter is a modern day incarnation of that for a lot of the celebrity teenager relationships, right? Can I get validation from, Miley Cyrus, who's now left Twitter, or Demi Lovato, or any number of these particular celebs. The idea that maybe I can actually get to meet Shaquille O'Neal in person because he'll announce where he is, right? All of that possibility. So you see that as another component. So there's always these publics, and these publics keep coming back, but the same practices are there.
When you grow up expecting to be able to find information at a moment's notice, what does it do to your ability to internalize information?
The price we pay for having easy access to so much information, easy, quick access to so much information, is we sacrifice some of the depth of our engagement with that information. So the kind of jumping, hopping from bit to bit to bit, clicking on links, takes the place of what used to be a more contemplative, I think, approach to thinking about one thing, whether it's one piece of information or the argument or the narrative of a book. It becomes much harder, I think, when you're bombarded by information and other stimuli as you are all the time on the web, to sit down and really focus on one particular thing. And so we gain kind of a breadth of engagement with information, but the cost is, I think, a certain superficiality in our relationship to that information. The human brain, like any animal brain, is attuned to distraction. In a sense, it wants to be distracted. It wants to see what's going on in its surroundings. So, it's not it doesn't miss some source of food or isn't attacked by, a tiger or something. If you look at the way the internet bombards us with stimuli, not only hyperlinks and different pages of information, but alerts, from Facebook updates to Twitter alerts to, incoming email and even our phones going off all the time. It creates, in a sense, an environment of information that plays to our desire to, or our need to be distracted. And so it becomes very difficult to keep a focus on anything when 5 different things are happening at once on your screen or between your screen and your smartphone and so forth. And it's just all sorts of environmental stimuli that come through, this information medium and keep us pretty much permanently distracted when we're online. What reading did for us, in particular book reading, is it slowed us down. It took us away from our natural distractedness and forced us to focus on one thing, on a book, on a line of argument, on a line of text, linearly, often for hundreds of pages and hours on end. And that's a very different type of thinking that we're kind of naturally used to. So the book promoted a kind of in-depth engagement with ideas, a kind of very deep thinking, concentrated thinking, contemplative, introspective thinking, which in many ways is kind of a unique aspect of that particular medium, the print on page medium that we never saw before, at least not broadly, until the book became popular 500, 600 years ago. I think the great value of thinking deeply and reading deeply and concentrating in general is that we begin to develop a unique personality, a unique intellect that's ours and ours alone. And that requires, I think, deep thought and in the ability to make our own associations and our own connections about things we understand deeply inside our own mind, rather than relying on, the associations and connections that might be out in the world and that we might access through hyperlinks, for instance. So I really think that the human self and the human personality becomes much richer when we can slow down and when we can think deeply and engage with information in more than just kind of a cursory manner. If a person is brought up looking at screens and using the web and being bombarded by information, then the question is, will the brain circuitry necessary to do things like deep reading, deep thinking, will those circuits ever even come into being? Will they be wired for that kind of thinking, or will they be wired completely for internet type of thinking, for taking in lots of information very, very quickly? And I think that's the big fear, is that we'll end up with a generation of people who are very good at using the net and very good at finding information and processing information very quickly, but don't really have any capacity for contemplativeness or for concentration or for deep engagement with information.
Where people make their fundamental error who criticize all this and think it's a danger and that it's reducing our capacity to act as proper human beings, is they think it's all this. You either sit in front of a screen of some kind, or tapping away all your life, going lol, and being childish and not writing in proper English sentences, or you sit in an old-fashioned study with books and you read properly and you engage properly and you go for walks. Well, I do both. And most people do both. It is not one or the other. Now, you may say, I've had the advantage of a classical education. I've grown up in a tradition in which I've understood books and I've understood history and I've been interested in these things and I like Latin and Greek and I like the smell of a proper book and so on. That's true, but I have made quite a lot of online friends. I don't even know what gender some of them are. They're people I chat with, either personal direct messaging in forums and Twitter and so on. Some of whom I think are very young, and you can sort of tell they are, and who astonish me occasionally with their knowledge of literature. In fact, I was having a conversation just the other day with one who was talking to me about Evelyn Waugh. And I think she's 12. And she seems to have read every book that Evelyn Waugh ever wrote and have a very intelligent view of this great novelist. And I almost wanted to say, but how would someone who's 12 like you ever have read these books? And I think, what am I saying? Of course they might have done. And spend a lot of their time on a forum as well. It's not, the two are not mutually exclusive. If you go back a little further to the time of Jane Austen, people found the idea of the novel simply horrific. People could not bear the idea of children sitting around reading. They should be, if they were going to read, it should be sermons and history, but certainly not novels. And they should be going about the place, sitting up straight and at dinner parties and walking and being healthy. And then, of course, along came radio, and people couldn't bear the idea of people sit around the radio, and then television, and then games, and then computers, and all these things seemed to those who were not brought up in them somehow to diminish, because we're all so proud of our youth. We think our youth and our childhood was somehow, if not perfect, it was, even if it was imperfect, it made us suffer. How dare these children now not suffer the way I did? They should be having the kind of life I did, made to read, made to do this. They should not have this freedom, this access. Or if they do, while I can approve of it, I ought to suggest that it's dangerous, that it's going to go wrong. There's a risk-reward ratio here, and for us the reward is so great that whatever the risk is, we try and contain it and understand it at best. But what we don't do is say the risk is too great. People in their mid to getting on to advanced teens who have never known, obviously, a world without the web. In fact, there may be 20-year-olds who've never known anything but that. Have they developed strange thumbs? Do they have peculiar ways of talking and listening? Do their eyes glaze over when they have to concentrate for more than 30 seconds? No, I don't believe any of that. I'm not particularly negative or pessimistic about the social qualities, the linguistic qualities, the concentration qualities of Generation Web, as they're called. I honestly believe that if you were to go back into the 1920s and take an ordinary, semi-educated 15-year-old and place him next to an ordinary, semi-educated 15-year-old now, you would find the one now knows more, understands more, is more socially confident, is more aware of the rest of the world, is more able and more adept at research, may not be able to say their 9 times table as fluently or repeat amo amasamata mamasamati amant. They may not be able to do that. Is that such a great loss to an old-fashioned person like me? I'd love to think people could do both. But let's get real about this. Connection is what humans crave. It's what we are all about. It's something that separates us from animals. It even comes before the fact that we have language, because the language is an example of a, if you like, a neural technology we have created to answer this need for connection. We are the social animal par excellence, or by devilry, if you like, if not necessarily excellence. We are constantly in need of connecting with people for friendship, love, sex, knowledge, growth, enmity, territoriality, all the imperatives that drive us as human beings. And we've created villages and towns to help us do that, and roads, and now we've created something else that allows us to do it even more.